Welcome everybody, so I am Josh and I am back here with a brand new movie review. This is going to be for Pacific Rim, so if you guys see a Pacific Rim image behind me, this is the movie that we're going to be reviewing. This movie came out in 2013 and this happens to be one of my favorite movies of all time. This is a movie that I come back to on a regular basis, so what I say about movies in general is that if you have really great one-liners, really great quotes, and the rewatchability factor to this movie kind of hints at this movie being actually a great movie and one that's going to be remembered for a while to come. And this is one of those movies that I think has come to be sort of a cult classic. This movie certainly did excite me in the theaters as well as a lot of other people that I sat and watched it with. It was really cool watching this movie in the theaters because I was a huge Godzilla fan at the time. I grew up with the Godzilla franchise as a kid. I also am a huge fan of Gundam. Now, I haven't really watched Gundam in a while, but back when it was on Cartoon Network late at night, whole Adult Swim thing, I'd catch it every once in a while when it was on that and watch some of the Gundam episodes and stuff like that. And just the fact that there's giant mech suits battling giant monsters is something that really does intrigue me, and this movie is no exception. So this movie starts off where you see Riley Beckett. He is pretty much a young hotshot pilot. He pilots the Jaegers, which are these giant sort of mech suits that have been designed so that they can fight kaiju. Now, the kaiju are these big giant monsters that come out of this thing called the Rift. The Rift is pretty much a portal to the kaiju home planet, which is in another dimension. Later on in the movie, you'll find out that they have to send a team down into that portal / rift in order to kind of blow it up and sort of take down the kaiju. This movie opens up where you see California being decimated by giant monsters as well as the entire world. This movie kind of explains from the beginning what the Jaeger pilots are and how they kind of operate the left and the right hemisphere of the left and right portion of these Jaeger suits. And these Jaeger mech suits are pretty much as tall as the kaiju, and they're pretty much built in order to fight these monsters. The military kind of designing these in order to kind of fight these creatures, and they have a variety of different weapons such as shields. Some of them have sort of swords, kind of like Gypsy Danger, and Gypsy Danger's the main sort of hero Jaeger and is piloted by Riley Beckett. You know, Riley Beckett, he wants to be sort of famous pilot and stuff, and sort of the intro sequence to Pacific Rim, it kind of hints at the Jaeger pilots being sort of worshipped as these really cool pilots, kind of like what they do with the military and some of their naval pilots or even sports teams with players and stuff like that. These are sort of those A-list players on the Jaeger side, and the Jaeger side is the last-ditch effort for the humans to kind of face off against these giant monsters that keep emerging from underneath the oceans. We've also got sort of Idris Elba, who plays Pentecost, and Pentecost is this military leader. He's been in several conflicts with the kaiju in the past. They've always been able to kind of ward off the kaiju, but they just keep coming back, and this is a problem because they want to kind of finish them off once and for all. And the kaiju become a bit of a problem for the Jaeger pilots when one of the missions, Raleigh and his brother is sent out to Anchorage, Alaska, and a kaiju named Knifehead takes out Raleigh's brother. They have different categories for these kaijus, similar to that of a hurricane, and you know, these monsters are pretty much a force of nature and a force to be reckoned with. Each and every one has a different personality, similar to that of King Ghidorah and Godzilla King of the Monsters, with the different monster heads kind of having different personalities. And that was one thing I liked about Godzilla King of the Monsters, is that each and every one of those King Ghidorah heads kind of had their own sort of personality when they were fighting Godzilla. One was sort of the alpha male, the other one was trying to be sort of that quirky character that was always messing around with the other heads and stuff like that. That's what these kaiju are. There's big bulky ones that kind of resemble that of a gorilla, which the Gypsy Danger fights as the second monster that emerges. There's also a flying one that kind of resembles that of a pteranodon. You know, each and every one of these have different characteristics, and even Guillermo del Toro, who's the director of this film, stated that he didn't want these monsters to feel like something that you've seen before in a different movie or even a television show. Like, he didn't want these monsters to feel like, you know, they're Godzilla monsters or Evangelion monsters, even though sort of this movie is kind of based on Godzilla and Evangelion and a lot of the monster movies that Guillermo del Toro watched as a kid. It was kind of cool to kind of see somebody take on sort of this monster movie mashup way before they even conceived of the Gareth Edwards Godzilla movie. Mostly because, you know, some of these monster movies in the past haven't really done well. Sort of like the Roland Emmerich Godzilla movie. While I think he might have been a fan of the Godzilla franchise and the property as a whole, he never actually kind of understood what makes a really good Godzilla movie. It was kind of cool to see sort of someone like Guillermo del Toro take on the director's chair and kind of work with sort of these actors to kind of make this the best sort of movie as possible. Later on, you see Knifehead. He kind of takes the arm of Gypsy Danger as well as, you know, knifing him in the head. Knifehead pretty much takes Raleigh's brother and pretty much kills him. Raleigh is pretty much heartbroken of this, and you kind of see that in the little glimpse that you get after his reaction to seeing his brother pretty much ripped from the pilot seat of this Jaeger. The Jaegers kind of have these sort of gimbals that the pilots kind of use when they're fighting, and they kind of on left and right kind of have to fight side by side with this thing called the neural bridge. The neural bridge allows you to access each and every one of the Jaeger pilots' sort of memories, and these Jaeger pilots kind of have to have similar builds, similar structure in order to kind of neural bridge together. So that is why sort of these two brothers are perfect for each other, just like sort of these Aussie pilots that you'll later meet throughout the later part of the film. Herc Hansen and Chuck Hansen, you know, those two are father and son, so that's why they kind of work together. And it's kind of a family relationship dynamic that if you are kind of related to each other, then you're going to have similar memories, so that way you can kind of fight and do battle with these kaiju kind of similar. They also have a training dojo, which is similar to that of the Matrix, that comes into play later on because Riley Beckett is trying to get Mako to work with him after sort of Idris Elba's character recruits him back into the Jaeger program. After this whole event where Riley's brother is pretty much taken from the Jaeger suit, he is heartbroken to the point where he kind of just gives up on the Jaeger program and decides to rebuild sort of this wall that they are building in order to try and fend off the kaiju. The kaiju kind of break through this wall, and this presents a little bit of a challenge for Rowley because he's like, why am I wasting my time building this wall when it's just going to collapse underneath me? And he doesn't really want to be there when that happens. He wants to be the one that's out there saving people and fighting. So Idris Elba recruits Rowley Beckett back into the Jaeger program. Rowley taking a little bit of time to kind of figure out whether or not he wants to actually join, but eventually shows up and he meets Mako for the first time, who Mako also has her own sort of subplot where she was kind of taken in by Idris Elba's character, and Idris Elba takes her sort of surrogate father figure in this movie. Her family is killed during the attack, and Idris Elba kind of saves her, which Rowley Beckett actually gets to see sort of when he neural bridges with her later on in the movie and kind of understands where she's coming from in terms of the traumas that she's facing. Because as a kid, this kind of really does haunt her when you see sort of the monster in the background kind of chasing after her, and that's where that sort of meme comes in where you see the little girl running and this giant monster kind of chasing after her, and it's kind of destroying buildings and throwing cars and everything in the kitchen sink at her. That's where that comes from, which is Pacific Rim. And Mako decides that she wants to go back into the Jaeger program and fight with Rowley Beckett. She's kind of really attracted to Rowley Beckett and his character in this movie, not to mention the fact that they kind of have a past history together, being that Rowley Beckett is sort of Idris Elba's friend within this film, takes under his wing a little bit because Rowley Beckett didn't have sort of that father figure himself growing up, and sort of when he loses his brother, he kind of needs that sort of emotional support, and that was what Idris Elba's character was for, is kind of giving Rowley Beckett that edge that he needs in order to kind of come back to the Jaeger program. The Chuck Hansen and his father give Rowley Beckett shit all the time throughout this movie. These characters are really cool just because of the fact that I kind of like these characters as human beings and as characters that were written in the story. They have a little English bulldog that kind of walks around with them, which I thought was pretty cool, and it's even slapped across as a logo on one of their armor plate because these Jaeger pilots kind of have like their own suit on top of the Jaeger pilot suit that they're piloting with the mech suit, and it's kind of cool to kind of see their kind of dynamic because they're in kind of a little bit of a clique, whereas Chuck Hansen is the new kid on the block, whereas Rowley Beckett was the old school Jaeger pilot that was really famous back in the day, and because he gave it up, now these two characters kind of clash and collide, and eventually kind of gains his trust after they fight these kaiju monsters, and Chuck Hansen and his father kind of take the charge but are then attacked by 3 different kaijus in sort of an Asian sort of territory, and this is also a Russian team and different Jaeger pilot teams that kind of help along with this attack. Gypsy Danger comes in and saves their butt, and then that's when you kind of see their characters start to respect Rowley Beckett and sort of what his plight is within this movie. Rowley Beckett kind of throughout this movie has sort of a hero's journey moment, which honestly is through most of these movies nowadays that they kind of borrow elements from Joseph Campbell and stuff, where you get this sort of character that kind of has to deal with a really traumatic situation but ends up coming out strong towards the end anyway, and that is certainly the case with Rowley Beckett. He eventually helps out the Aussie crew and they kind of gain respect for him, and then that way they can kind of finish off the mission towards the end with the Jaegers kind of finding out after Charlie Day, who's this sort of eccentric scientist that works along with another scientist, comes into play, and he's trying to study the kaiju. He's really obsessed with these kaiju, kind of like you would be obsessed with things like Pokemon or even sort of, like dinosaurs and stuff like that. Like that's what Charlie Day's character is really obsessed by, and he's trying to create sort of this neural bridge and neural network to be able to kind of speak to the kaiju and hopefully enable that to help them stop the kaiju advances. Throughout this movie, he's kind of like an obsessed fanboy. He's like, oh, I really want to meet them. And Ron Perlman, who's this sort of kaiju bone collector and kaiju sort of organ collector, comes into play, and he's like, yeah, I've seen kaiju up close. You definitely don't want to mess with these things, and you definitely don't want to see them for yourself. And after they sort of neural bridge with one of the kaiju brains, one of the monsters kind of attacks him. This is the pterodactyl monster, which you see Gypsy Danger fight within this movie, and it's a freaking spectacular scene, especially when you're in the theater and you see sort of people like leaping out of their seats and kind of cheering along with what's happening in the film. Like, it was really cool to kind of see that, especially since that I remember I saw a movie before that, I forget which movie it was, and I actually saw it in a kind of crappy theater and the projector wasn't working and everything, so they just gave me a free ticket and I went to see Pacific Rim, and it just brought me back, childhood memories of watching dinosaur movies and Godzilla movies and stuff like that, and being really obsessed with sort of like science fiction and mech suits and stuff. This movie is perfect. I think if you're a huge mech suit fan or a giant monster movie fan, you're gonna really enjoy this movie. I don't see a single problem with this movie. Yeah, the movie's a little bit long, the pacing's a little bit, it drags on a little bit at times, but every single minute of this movie matters. Every single character that comes into play has something to do within this film, and I think as a fan of monster movies and as a fan of big giant monster battles, you're gonna be having a blast throughout this movie. There's an instance where Gypsy Danger grabs a hold of this giant sort of ship and kind of wields it kind of like a sword. One of the kaiju kind of takes him up in the air, sort of like pterodactyl would, kind of launches him into the atmosphere of Earth and then drops him down. Not before you see Gypsy Danger pull out this sword and kind of just wreaks havoc with it. And it's stuff like that that really kind of is really seminal moments within this film that kind of adds to the overall arching story. Like even the sort of the HQ command guy in this movie has sort of a funny aesthetic to him. Like each and every one of these characters has a place and point of being within this film. And I think Del Toro did a really good job with even the visual effects and everything. These Jaegers feel like they have real weight to them, whereas in this movie they kind of are smashed into buildings by the kaiju, and the kaiju smashed into buildings by the Jaegers and stuff. And when a Jaeger takes a step, it kind of feels like it has weight to it, like it's realistic. It's crashing through debris and stuff like like that, and you really feel the weight of this when you're watching this movie, either in a cinema or at your home theater system. And I'd highly recommend that if you go and watch this movie, you end up purchasing this on Blu-ray or some sort of streaming service, whether that's Apple or Netflix or something like that. Go and track this movie down and watch this, because this is a movie that you're going to want to watch. And you're probably going to end up rewatching over and over again like me. I pretty much watched it to the point of actually wearing out the disc and everything, and it just starts skipping because, you know, the disc is so scratched because I've used the disc so many times to watch it over and over again, so I might have to go purchase it again when I get paid next and stuff like that. But it's an awesome movie, especially after sort of the attack with Knifehead. You see this grandfather and sort of his grandson. They're sort of on the beaches of Alaska, and it's kind of like a frozen beach, and they have a metal detector, and the kids like, I never find anything good. And you see sort of the Rowley's Gypsy Danger kind of crash upon the shores, and it's just scenes like that that really, these are just scenes that you can pick out, and every single one of these scenes has something cool in it. So I'm gonna give Pacific Rim an A+. I know I didn't really dive too much into the story and everything, but I really do want you guys to watch this movie for yourself, because trust me on this, you're not gonna regret it. Like, this is gonna be 2.5 hours worth of your time. You know, I got this as sort of a birthday gift from my parents when this movie came out on Blu-ray. This is probably the best birthday gift ever, just because this movie is something that sort of when I was feeling down and stuff I would watch, and especially just because of the fact that the story is so good, as I stated before. I think you guys will definitely enjoy it. I think from sort of the sound design to the special effects to the story to the characters and everything, as I've stated before, everything matters and everything comes into play. So that is why I'm going to give Pacific Rim an A+. Hopefully you guys enjoy this review. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think of Pacific Rim, and as always guys, rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.